This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager.
Hello and welcome to episode 50 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm your host, Behram Kazi, and with me, of course, is Jared Kimber, who wants to tell you something, so I'm going to give it to him right away.
Yeah, this is just housekeeping. Just for those who watch these podcasts on YouTube, we are moving all the lives to the Jared Kimber podcasting. So hopefully, Muku remembered to put it in the links beneath. But if not, I'm sure you can find a link to it. So from now on, this is the last Uncovered that will be on the main Jared Kimber page. We'll probably have one more wagon wheel before we move over 100%. But obviously, Footmarks is already on that other page. And during the World Cup, and this is the crucial one for anyone who likes the videos, is if we do any live videos from the World Cup, they will all be on the Jared Kimber podcasting. This channel is going to stay, but just for pre-made stuff and everything else. Not that Behram isn't pretty. I'll still find reasons to bring him over to this channel. But for the live chats and everything from that point of view, that will be on the other channel. That's what we set the other channel up for. Anyway, I'm sure now we could talk about, I don't know, Jason Roy or something.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's happened. Of course, I think we'll start with the Asia Cup, and India won the final, defeated Sri Lanka by 10 wickets. It was over before we knew it. They even chased it down in like 6.1 overs. And yeah, I mean, I reckon, Jared, you could last longer.
Well, I can tell you the full story. It was raining, and I was looking at my phone waiting for the game to come on. And I'd been looking after the kids all morning I think it was Sunday, wasn't it? So my wife was out singing. So all morning I was looking after the kids, and then I saw that it was still raining, and I didn't check. Obviously, wherever Cricket or Cricket Buzz, whatever I was looking at, I hadn't seen the little thing saying they would come back on. So I went and had a shower, and then while I was having a shower, I was like, I might as well just clean the bathroom. So I had a shower and cleaned the bathroom, and when I came out, the game was basically over. I think they were about 31 for 7 or 32 for 6 or something ridiculous. And I was like, my God, I've just missed the final. How long was I in the shower? But I will say this, my bathroom was so clean.
Yeah, no, it was really surprising. I was at a family lunch and I was like, okay, I'll miss the start of the game. And then I turned the TV on and same story, 12 for 6 or something like that. And yeah, I mean, of course, India absolutely steamrolled Sri Lanka. Maybe that's even an understatement. And I think we need to talk about Mohammad Siraj, because after 28 innings in ODI cricket, he has 53 wickets at 19.11. He does, go under the radar with Bumrah in that team, of course. But I mean, it was the joint quickest 5-wicket haul in ODI history. He took 16 balls, took 4 wickets in an over. And yeah, how do you rate him overall? Because he's had quite the start.
Yeah, I think I'm right in saying that I had India as the worst power playing bowling team in the last 3 years against the best teams in one-day cricket. And when Cheyenne looked this up for us, we realized that there's basically two different worlds. There's the world where Siraj wasn't playing, where they were averaging like over 100 or something.
108.
108. There you go. Thank you to Cheyenne for that one. And then the current world where Siraj has come in with them averaging -7. So you might remember that number, but I can't remember that one. But the point being that it's an incredible
23.4 is the number, I think.
Which is, I know that doesn't sound really, really low, but it is, because teams don't actually lose a lot of wickets in the power play. So generally the average is well over 30. So it's probably 34 or 35. So they're looking, since Siraj has been in, you're looking at a team that's been 20, 25, 30% better than other power play bowling teams. I remember he's always been confusing to me, because he had a really great year in the IPL where he took a lot of wickets. And then he had another year where he didn't take any wickets, but no one could hit him off the square. And usually what happens is you get a bowler who's really good at taking white ball wickets, and then people stop taking any risks off them. So Bhuvi's a really good example of this. Sunil Narayan was another one. Rashid Khan. We've seen this before. Lasif Malinga. We've seen that sort of trend before. It stops them taking wickets. But Siraj, there's been, like, his pattern's been all over the place. One year he looks brilliant. Another year he looks frugal. The next year he looks a bit dogged. He's kind of not, he's not been that great. But what I would say is that his natural ability to get, I would say he probably gets the most deviation off the wobble ball of anyone. So in those first 6 overs that he can bowl, it makes sense that he should cause the most amount of problems. I think he's a highly skilled bowler. I think, if anything, and this is probably a larger point, but he does prove what I've always said, which is there's so much talent out in the rest of the cricket world. And quite often we keep looking in the same places over and over again. And it means that especially people who don't go to elite schools or don't have parents who can push them or whatever get overlooked. To have a player of Siraj's talent come so late to the game the way that he has. And you and I both know there's a lot of Pakistani players and a lot of Sri Lankan players. The same sort of thing happens again and again. We're now seeing it with Bangladesh players as well. There's so much talent out there. And there really is, what you could do if you could find these guys earlier would be absolutely incredible, because I don't think you'd have to be, even if you're a scout with one eye, Behram, and you were drunk, and you fell over the day before and hit your head. I think if you saw him bowl, you'd be like, that's not a normal thing that I'm seeing right here. He's probably even better than we thought when he first came through. But yeah, I mean, I think him and Bumrah together are an incredible partnership, really, if they can get together, because of the way that they can do both ends as well. Pardon the, I'm not sure if that is a pun, but pardon the weird sexual innuendo or the weird viral innuendo, depending on, some people would have read that sexy. Some people would have read that as vomit and diarrhea. In either way, that's not what I meant. I meant that they can bowl at the power play and in the death.
Yeah, they absolutely can. And if I were that scout with my head hurt and one eye and drunk, I wouldn't be the scout. I would have been subbed for Manas. Manas would have been the concussion sub and he would have been the scout, right? But you spoke about Siraj bowling the wobble ball. I think he consistently, shaped the ball away from the right-hander really, really well. And that is always difficult. And, speaking of wobble ball, Pandya has been doing it. Bumrah, the lateral movement that he is generating, it's like a mile, right? It's absolutely unplayable. You've got Kuldeep's mystery into this, add that, and of course, Jadeja keeping things tight. You look at India's bowling attack, and all of a sudden, you're like, okay, these guys are shaping up quite well, but they are not playing all three of Shami, Siraj, and Bumrah. And whilst this is working for them right now, do you think as the World Cup progresses and they go deep into that tournament, this could potentially come back and haunt them?
It's a brilliant question, and South Africa is the bigger question than India, right? Because South African have got probably going to have Marco Jansen in at 7. Weirdly enough, his bowling with the new ball's been horrendous. So how he's going to bowl in those games might be the bigger issue. But then after that, they've got no one who can bat, right? India, if Siraj is bowling the way he is, and Mohammad Shami is, I think I said this on a previous episode, but one of the best strike bowlers in ODI cricket history. And obviously Jasprit Bumrah is Jasprit Bumrah. It's almost impossible not to play them, right? Yeah. And to not go in with that. The question then becomes, what do you need to do with the 2 spinner spots? Are those seamers so dominant that you can have Jadeja as a holding bowler and then bring in Ashwin, for instance?
Which could happen.
With Akshar being injured, right? Yeah. It's a very big, or Washington Sundar, whoever, it doesn't really matter. But you bring in one of those guys knowing that you can basically replace Shardul's batting. They bat in a different style, but they can replace the level of batting. And then you're batting until number 8, right? And you can use that combination however you want, Washington can go up the order and be a pinch hitter. Ashwin can be a pinch spin blocker, whatever you need those guys to be. You're still batting until 8. And then you're like at 9, 10, and 11, maybe Shami gets a couple away, maybe Jasprit gets a couple away and helps us occasionally, right? If you have Kuldeep in that side, and I know he can hold a bat, but, he's not on the level of the other guys we've just mentioned, not even on Shardul's level, right? Yeah. I just think that knowing Indian cricket, and look, I haven't chatted to anyone in the Indian camp about this. I'll send Rahul Dravid an email now explaining it to him. But, I would think that if you took away that number 8 who can bat, I think the top order will bat slower, and that will cause more of a problem. And then you need your seamers to be even better. And you could, it's one of these things you see a lot of T20 pundits, and I'm talking about really good analysis people in fantasy cricket and everything else, always say, number 7 is such an overrated position. And it is on paper. It is not an overrated position psychologically for cricketers. If a cricketer looks up and sees their number 7 is a bowler, they get nervous when they're opening the batting, right? And that plays all the way through until you end up with a batting lineup of about 10 or 11. There's always, a sneaky less. And I just think that India have had so many times when they've gone defensive or conservative or played within themselves for so many reasons. Don't give them one. So either Ashwin comes in and he spins it one way and Jadeja spins it the other, and you know that you might not get as many wickets as Kuldeep will get. Or you bring Kuldeep in, you then play the 3 best seamers, and you just say, we're going to get so many wickets with these 4 bowlers, and Jadeja and Hardik will pick up, enough from the rest, good combination for the rest as well, that will be absolutely flying. And we're willing to bet on the fact that we're going to make fewer runs. So, I mean, that's the way I would be having that conversation. But I think the most important thing is that you have to be very, very clear with everyone, right? Yeah. And say to them, we still have, let's say you have Jadeja at 7 and you have Kuldeep at 8, right? You just say to the team, we have Ravi Jadeja at number 7. If you can't trust that, right, just go out and bat normally. And then if it all goes to shit, Siraj will take, 4 wickets at an over and we'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally down for that plan, right? Because I would love to play those 3 seamers together, or all 3 of those seamers together. But I do feel that India is not going to opt for that. And I think they're going to play both Washington and Ashwin in this series versus Australia, which I'm startled that there's a full series right before the World Cup
with well.
Australia. Yeah.
I tell you what, it's very rare that England, India, and Australia don't play each other before a World Cup to prepare each other for it. They are very good at looking after their own big 3 interests. And to be fair, these other teams have got to work out ways of doing similar things as well. But India and Australia and England, it's hilarious to me how often this happens. England will be really upset that they're playing Ireland and that they haven't organized this a little bit better, I think. If I was an England player, I think I would be contacting the ECB and just going, how did this happen? Can we play Oman? Can we play Nepal? Can we play someone in Asia?
Yeah, because New Zealand are getting to play Bangladesh as well. So both the Trans-Tasman sides are getting some experience in Asia as well. So that's quite helpful for them. If you had to pick one, Washington or Ashwin?
I think I pick Ashwin. I mean, I don't think you find a bit of bigger Washington fan than me, other than his dad. I'm a huge fan of his, and I think he would do a really, really good job. But I think even though Ashwin's not a great wicket taker in ODI cricket, he is a great wicket taker, and he has the ability in certain situations to manufacture a wicket when maybe others don't. And I think his batting's more useful than Washington's, even though Washington probably should be a much better batter than Ashwin. And maybe will end up as a much better player as he matures and everything else. But right at the moment, but there's also the experience factor. Like if you have Ashwin in that camp, you have all the strategies, right? You have the discussions and everything else. And so I would feel more
session before the World Cup. He's gonna teach everyone how to execute that properly.
Exactly.
Because someone messed it up in the IPL, didn't they? Someone messed it up.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like these things go wrong, but yeah. So I think from that perspective, they're just little things that he go with. But I think Washington's a fantastic player, but I feel like he's still in development as a talent, and maybe if they want a player who can be slightly more of an X factor. The only other thing I would say with Washington is that he's a very good new ball bowler,
right.
And if they look at that lineup and they go, really, what we want is maybe Bumrah, Siraj, let's say Shami in this situation, to bowl the bulk of that sort of middle, or we want Kuldeep and Jadeja in that situation to bowl the bulk of the middle. What would really be handy is a spinner who can bowl us 5 overs between 10 and 20 over mark when the ball's still skidding on a little bit and you can get a little bit out of it from that perspective. So, there's an argument to be made for that if they think they need that. And it's not that Ashwin can't do that job, but Ashwin's probably more suited to bowling in the middle period in a one-day international. In T20, I think they could both do it. But I think Washington's a real new ball bowler.
Yeah, that's interesting because India won't be relying on that bowler to bowl 10 overs per se, right? Because they've got Hardik, and Hardik is bowling brilliantly. And Shubman got runs, which is also great news for them, albeit in a losing cause. But he was the leading scorer at the Asia Cup. And, in an era where, of course, Rohit and Virat are both still, top drawer, they're world class. But we've seen the best of them. Shubman is coming up. And if he's the top scorer at the Asia Cup, that's going to do his confidence a world of good going into a home World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, does he need confidence? I know that's a weird thing to say. Look, everyone likes to be doing their job slightly better when they hit a major tournament or a major job or whatever, whatever you're doing in your life. So I get it from that point of view. But he's the sort of player that probably gets major confidence from one good cover drive. Like, I think there are certain batters that maybe would need that a little bit more. But we know he's good. And this could be his World Cup. Might be a World Cup too early for him. Although KSR put a tweet out today saying this is the last World Cup ever. So, might be Shubman's last chance to take over a World Cup. But I think a player like him, not just that he's good in Asian conditions, but that ability to sort of play on the up and get on top of bowlers a little bit. I kind of feel like him and Johnny Bairstow, the sort of games to have, especially in that first 10 to 30 over, 0 to 30 over period. It'd be interesting to me if they could both have very, very good tournaments. They could both fail, of course, and people could work it out. And, Bairstow, his last couple of years have been weird in all levels of cricket. But I wonder if those aren't the sort of players that could go on to score 350, 450 runs in this tournament. But the confidence thing, I remember talking to an international player, must have been around the 2019 World Cup, about confidence. And he was saying that after making runs, you feel better than when you haven't made runs. But sometimes not making runs makes you watch the ball harder, makes you make better decisions and everything else, right? There's no magic cure-all or anything else. And Shubman Gill was good before and he's good now. The only thing that it changes for me, Bayram, is that if he fails in the first 2 games, Indian fans won't say that he's terrible and he should never play for India again. So I suppose that helps his social media.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to be playing this Australia series, right? I know they've rested a lot of players, but Shubman's still in that squad, if I'm not wrong. So that's a good opportunity. And good on India.
People watch that? Do you think people will watch that?
I'm not sure. I guess people would watch anything in the build-up to the World Cup because it's all very relevant. But then again, if India's best team is not playing, should Australia's best team play? Because Australia have had a few injuries, right?
Well, Australia sent Mitchell Starc home, didn't they? And someone else home. Obviously, the Travis Head injury as well. Australia's got a lot of injuries. So it's not the best Australian team. It's not the best Indian team. I didn't see the ratings for the Asia Cup. I haven't asked anyone what those ratings were. But I didn't feel like it was massively hyped and everything. I mean, this is the problem with having, it's a tournament and then it's a bilateral series and then it's a World Cup. When the World Cup comes around, there will be more interest. And that is a natural thing that we see all the time. But it's not quite the same. So, I mean, I would have thought if you're an Indian player, you're better off or an Australian player, you're better off to fail in this particular tournament unless your position is in jeopardy, just because no one's going to be watching, right? Like, even if those who are watching, they're going to kind of be side-eyeing it a little bit. And so it's a little bit different. But look, Shubman Gill's fantastic. It was good to see him make some runs.
Yeah, and on that India resting players part, I just want to say this on record that a lot of people are criticizing India for, again, chopping and changing. Look at what's happening at Pakistan, okay? You want your best players to rest, okay? And coming to Pakistan, once again, chaos has ensued. They are in tatters, and that's something very synonymous with Pakistan cricket. And it's weird how in the past that hasn't held them back. If anything, they've thrived under chaos. And of course, that's, a narrative to build, but we don't know how things will play out. Naseem Shah is gone. He's out of the World Cup. And there are 2 stories that I'm hearing right now, Jared. One is that this was a freak injury and there was no recurrence. The other one is that he had issues with his shoulder. He was complaining about them, but they were being managed. So either way, even if it's a freak injury, I think they've really dropped the ball with respect to workload management. And we've spoken about this enough times on this podcast itself. Do you think, the onus falls on the team management? This is a howler by them?
Who is the game where they completely dominated everyone with the ball? Was it an early
in Asia Cup? Bangladesh.
The Bangladesh game. That is the last game. That is the last game outside of the final. I would have picked Shaheen Afridi and Naseem Shah. Might have tried one of the others. Maybe I would have mixed and matched a little bit, rested one, then brought one back, all those sorts of things. There's no way. I mean, there's just no reason for them to be playing in those games. It's different if maybe you get to the semi-final even, and then you think to yourself, wow, we could win a trophy here. India are not playing they did end up playing at full strength, but you think to yourself, maybe India won't play at full strength. We can maybe sneak a trophy here. So what have Pakistan done? They've lost the Asia Cup and they've lost a player. I don't see the point of it. The only thing I would say is this, that have you ever heard the theory? And I'm trying to remember, and I know this is something that I think it used to be from old business manuals or something. And you might know this from your time in Canada business, Canadian business scene, as you were. That thing that people, before they had to give a big pitch or go into a sales meeting, whatever, would like get someone to slap them in the face or cut their tie and they had to replace their tie with someone else's tie, or they pinch themselves on the chest or the nipple, right, before they went in. Although the nipple might be sexual again, I don't know. But from that perspective, you can certainly see that there does appear to be sometimes with Pakistan cricket, you almost need a key injury or something going wrong, or a conspiracy or controversy or whatever to almost get everyone to that level of peak Pakistan World Cup cricket frenzy. But no, Nazim Shah, you can't really replace him. Pakistan can do better than most teams at replacing him, but he's a different level of talent, I think, than anyone who will come in. So it's a problem. The only thing I would say is that Australia won the 2003 World Cup without Jason Gillespie and Shane Warne. Pakistan didn't have Waqar in 1992. I could go on and on of teams that have missed key players at times in World Cups, and yet still still won the tournament. It's a problem-solving tournament. We talk about that all the time, and this is another problem that Pakistan have to deal with. If they played a part in this injury, if it's true that he had a shoulder issue and he was bowling through the Asia Cup, they deserve what they get. But if
he was playing versus Nepal in Multan, and Multan is blistering hot right now, right? So, I rest my case. But, I am all for that whole narrative. And I too believe that at times, or more often than not, Pakistan cricket has needed a chaotic trigger which kind of galvanizes them and makes them, work harder or whatever. But Naseem had 32 wickets in 14 ODIs, and he was averaging less than 17. You can't replace that. He was an all-phase bowler. Power play, death, middle overs. So, yeah, we're all devastated over here. But, of course, there were some positives as well. Rizwan got 86. Abdullah Shafiq played a game, scored a 50. Iftikhar Ahmed, I'm not sure how well-versed you are with Ifti Mania, but this man is
great.
Completely, he's charting new heights. He's scoring runs, he's taking wickets.
A couple of years ago, I was working with his agent to try and get him sold. And I remember, doing the darts on him and going, there's so many little bits of his game that are really, really good. But he was like an above average franchise level player, but not the sort of player you'd naturally want in overseas leagues. And even 2 or 3 years ago, you look at his numbers going, there's not a lot here. What he did in that last World Cup in Australia was phenomenal. Yeah. The fact that he's playing a different role again now, and we've seen, him back in Pakistan at times as well, plus the international stuff. It's a great story of a player rising very, very late. And look, this is the sort of story that if you're, Mickey Arthur or someone like that in Pakistan cricket, this is the story I'd be talking up at every press conference of like, look, isn't one of those older guys getting better at something? Because Shan Masood, Misbah al-Haq, it's not the first time that we've seen it. All right.
Saeed Ajmal.
Yeah, you need to talk those stories up in Pakistan, because otherwise they will find a 14-year-old with a good mullet and bring him into the side, right? You need to let people know that everyone develops in a different way. Look, he's a fantastic player. I think he was one of those players before I was asked to work on him. I don't think I had a strong opinion on him. And then afterwards, I was like, no, there are bits of this that can definitely work for him. And I'm really glad that he's taken the little bits in his game that I had to kind of wade through. Do you know what I mean? I had to go through some dirt to find them. And he's really polished up all those different parts of his game. And it's a fantastic story.
Plus, his power hitting game has really improved. He can manipulate strike as well. He can kind of bat in a crisis. And those buffer overs, which, he did really well against Sri Lanka. We spoke about, all the teams prior to the World Cup. And we both had Pakistan placed in that tier 2 behind England and India, and then just about at par with Australia. Do you think they've slipped to maybe tier 3 or 4 after losing Naseem?
I can't imagine they would have slipped to tier 4 because tier 4 is probably Sri Lanka, right? Like I haven't quite done my tiers. I'll do a power list, obviously, probably next week. We just finished the team maps. So all the team maps will be up. The first one will be up tomorrow. So it's, I don't know, India, I want to say Afghanistan and Netherlands. No, it's India, someone in Netherlands. I can't remember who the first 3 teams I did were.
Bangladesh. The third one is Bangladesh.
Was it Bangladesh? Yeah, that sounds right. Yep. So they're up, and then we've got a few more teams after that, and then a few more teams at the end. So yeah, I haven't quite got to the point of tiers. I can't imagine, like, if you think about it, they're going to make par score pretty regularly, right? There are some flaws with the Pakistan team, but they're going to make a par score pretty regularly. Whereas if you compare that to Sri Lanka, who you might say now has a slightly better bowling attack, right?
Yeah.
But they're not going to make a par score very regularly, right? They're going to make probably below par scores. And I don't mean that just because they went out for 12, because I did the podcast with Estelle a couple of weeks ago where we'd already discussed all this, right? me and Estelle were when people were saying, oh, they've won all these games in a row, me and Estelle were like, yeah, they still can't bat, right? So I think that Pakistan is still a better team there. So it's probably maybe tier 3 with South Africa and Australia in tier 2 maybe at this stage. But I would have to go through the details a little bit closer.
Fair enough. You, of course, brought up Sri Lanka, and you mentioned how, they have a fragile batting order, but Kusal Mendes scored a lot of runs in this Asia Cup, was the second highest run scorer.
What was his strike rate?
Yeah, I mean, I can't quite remember, but not as high, of course. But then Charitha Salanka and Sadira Samaravikrama after him also did well with the bat. This middle order looks better than it did before. That we can say for sure, right?
Yeah, I think it's improved. But we looked, me and Estelle looked pretty closely at all these different details of them. It's not improved to the point where you think that they're not like, if I told you that they scored 380 against England, would you be surprised?
Sri Lanka, yeah, very much.
So
unless Kusal Pereira scored like 180 of 120, maybe then it's possible.
Yeah. So within that, you don't have a situation where we're suddenly thinking that they should do something dramatically different, right? And so, do I think they can make par scores? Yeah, I think they can. How many above par scores can they make against New Zealand, India, Australia, England, Pakistan, South Africa? Right? That's the question. If they can make 2 above par scores there, I think they've actually got the absolute most out of their team, right? And look, everyone's been waiting for Mendes for a million years, and obviously they had a couple of batters. I think they had the 3rd highest batter in the strike rates, not in the runs in Asia Cup. But if you look, their strike rates are around 80, 85. I think Sri Lanka's strike rate was like 75. Does that sound right? Does it sound like I'm making that up? I mean, I don't know how much of that was.
Sounds about right. I mean, you've got to take the surfaces into account as well. Like a lot of these surfaces were slow and low, so it wasn't like run scoring was particularly easy.
Nisanka's was 78. I just looked that up, by the way. Do you see what I'm saying? That's the difference. I'm not saying these guys can't bat, because I actually think in Test cricket over the last couple of years, we've seen that they can bat. I think Mendes is a ridiculously talented player for someone who may not end up getting the most out of himself. Kusal, of course, sorry. So, in that sort of situation, what's their best case scenario in, let's say, against a decent attack? So let's not say India or South Africa. Let's say England or New Zealand. So a slight step down on that. Is their best case scenario scoring 300? Right?
Probably, yeah.
So then they are going to have to take 6 to 8 wickets quite regularly in order to be defending that against the best batting lineups. And, I just did the numbers on them for the team match. They were the last team I did, actually. And that's how they win. And it's the only way they win, right? They don't bat people out. Occasionally their bowlers are really good at bowling teams out for 240, 250, 260, that sort of total. And then their batters kind of crawl there. They might get a couple of those. But the strength that they have is the ability to be able to bowl teams out. Now, the great news is that they have plenty of options there. But
yeah, a new one, Dunit Welalage or Welalage, he scored 40.
I was going to ask you how to pronounce that, and now you've absolutely terrified me.
I think it's Welalage, because the Sri Lankan commentators were saying Welalage. Everyone else was saying Welalage. Okay. And then the great cricketer boys were saying Welalage and Welalagas. I'm going to call him Wella Legend, because that's how well he played versus India, right? 5 wickets and big ones. Kohli, Rohit, KL.
I like him as well. He can bat a little bit. I know he's captain, I think, of the under-19 team, I want to say, as well.
And he's already gotten a lot of big wickets like Babar, Smith, Kohli, Rohit. Like he's got the big dogs, right? And
he
should have won that game.
Yeah, no doubt they should have done better in that game and in the other one as well. But look, I think that what happened was Sri Lanka. I think people have forgotten how bad Sri Lanka were for a long time. So I can't remember. They lost something like 12 out of 15 ODIs over a period. Then they won. I don't know. I'm just making these numbers up. But they run like 11 on the trot or 9 on the trot
13,
or whatever it was.
13 on the trot very recently, and that's the most after that Australian team. So,
but that came just after losing all those games.
And versus associate nations for the most part.
And versus associates. And when I filtered out, the only associate nation I had was Netherlands in my data because they made the World Cup. And when you look at it, it's okay, but in some ways it's like a team of like shy hopes, right? And then on the other side of the ball, you maybe have a peak Pakistani bowling attack, right? You know, the ability to spin the ball in both ways, spinners who can bowl all the way through the innings, you know, a freak bowler who bowls with a really weird action, a really good couple of seamers. They don't take a lot of wickets at the top. That would be the only thing that I would worry about is if you are permanently going to make less runs than normal, less runs than the top sides, and then you're in a position where you're not taking wickets straight away. That is my biggest concern, because that's the bit you want to take wickets straight away. So if you make 270, you can have the other team, you know, regularly 50 for 3 or whatever, and then put pressure on in the middle. But they're really good bowling, but don't sleep on the fact that they are absolutely horrendous in their batting. And, you know, I think the 50 was shocking because of how dramatic it was and everything else. But I didn't message. I should have messaged Estelle, but I think me and Estelle would have been like, yeah, seems like a possible outcome. And they only need 2 or 3 of those in the World Cup, and then it's going to be very hard for them to get anywhere else. So I think they're at about 20 or 30 to 1 at the moment. And I think that's probably fair. Oh, also, someone in the comments, by the way, just before you got here, I was reading one of the comments was saying that do India deserve to be favorites now? India have never not been favorites for this tournament.
Yeah, they've always been favorites
in the last 4 months, I want to say. I think there were periods in the last 4 years, obviously, where England have been the favorites, but India have been really short favorites for a long time now. So it shows you how much people get swayed by one game or the talk around the team, right?
Particularly in the subcontinent. It's a thing.
Yeah, I think that happens everywhere, though, because you look at South Africa, I can tell you, South Africa shortened, even in the odds. But if you listen to fans, South Africa's like, right, a semi-final chance right now. And you're like, well, whoa. At one stage, South Africa didn't look like they were going to have to go through the qualifiers in this tournament, right? There's a lot going on with that team. We can't suddenly just say because they played a couple of games against a weird experimental Australian team that were trying to score at 9 runs and over, that suddenly South Africa is better. I think South Africa is a really good team and they're a really interesting team. They might be the best value for money if you bet. I don't bet. Do you bet?
I used to. Now I live in Pakistan.
So obviously you don't bet. But if you are looking for value for money, they're probably the best value for money one. Yeah, I think you could ride your luck with South Africa. And if nothing else, at the end, you will feel the same kind of anguish that all South Africans feel.
You know what I made a lot of money on? On Rahat Ali going for less than 3 runs and over. Made me lots of money back in the day in Test cricket. And I know you're a big Rahat Ali fan, right? But yeah, I mean, just some closing notes on Sri Lanka before we end this. I'll just say that what I've seen of Dunith Velalage, I think that, look, the fact that he's 20 and the charisma that he brings onto the scene and the way he just approaches his game, bowls a very nice length, you know, consistently. Very, very accurate with his length. And he could be the difference in a lot of games if he's paired up with Hasaranga. We haven't seen that yet. I'd really, really like to see how he's fair when he's
Do you think they will do that? Because Hasaranga spins the ball in the same direction.
Theekshana has an hamstring pulled, right? So he's not going to be available for the first few games. They're going to have to go for both of those guys.
Yeah, it's interesting just because they spin the ball in the same direction. I know Hasaranga can bowl wrong-uns, of course. But look, he's a great backup to have as the batting confidence and everything. I don't think is the difference between them making a semi-final and not making a semi-final, which I think maybe some Sri Lankan fans at the moment are kind of pinning their hopes on that. I'm not sure if he even gets in their best side unless they end up on pitches where they need 3 spinners. And then obviously, I suppose you got Dhananjaya as well. But, in that situation, it might be a little bit different. But and look, he's a fantastic talent. And maybe it's not for this World Cup, but going ahead, the ball to Baba, like the control that he has over his length specifically of just tossing it that little bit fuller, but still not having a position where a top player of spin like Baba can come down and get to it. It's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, world class and well-deserved wicket. But anyway, that's enough for the Asia Cup. This is Uncovered, episode 50. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me is Jared. And we'll be back after this short break to talk about South Africa and Australia. See you shortly.
This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. If you love sports and you have the hottest takes or the coldest mic drops, enroll in Fans with Laptops and we'll get them out there. Occasionally, I also talk about behind the scenes stuff. A huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon and helped us build this channel. Join our Patreon community and unlock exclusive benefits. Enjoy AMAs, live calls with me, and connect with fellow cricket enthusiasts on Discord.
Welcome back to episode 50 of Uncovered. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, of course, is Jared Kimber, as always. So, Jared, the last time we spoke in last week's Uncovered podcast, South Africa and Australia was quite a dim looking series. Australia had won all 5 limited overs fixtures, the 3 T20s and the first 2 ODIs. And South Africa really turned it around, right, in quite a heroic manner. They not only won the remaining 3 ODIs to win the series, they won each of those games by 100+ run margin, which is elaborate, I suppose, to say the least. How do you view this comeback? I know you've spoken a bit about it before, but that's quite phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, how serious do we think Australia was taking it by the end?
I mean, Mitchell Marsh was opening in the last game, but then he scored a 50. So I suppose somewhat serious.
Yeah, I just think, but I mean, I don't want to shit on them doing well, but like by the end, I did sort of just think to myself that it was, they didn't really. I don't think either team cared massively about the result of this series, but I think that South Africa were very upset with the way that they had played so far. But by the end, it did feel like Australia was just pulling out random people from, the Big Bash and giving them a game a little bit. And so I find it hard to take too many. I mean, and the other thing is that even if you say, well, they played really, really well, does this help either team playing in South Africa? I don't know. I'm guessing not. So I'm not sure how many positives I would take out of it from that perspective. But that middle or that top 6 that South Africa has is still working, and that is their most important way of being successful in this World Cup. And if it fumbles, it doesn't work. And so I suppose them struggling early on in that series was a concern from that perspective, right? And so being able to pull it back was good. But yeah, I'm not gonna. It's not that I don't want to take it seriously or anything like that for either team, really. It's just that we should be taking from this that these are warm-ups. And, like Australia, which game was it when Australia was going at like 9 runs and over and was bowled out? Was it?
I think the second one.
Yeah.
They scored 390 odd, yeah.
And so, they were just mucking around is the wrong way of putting it, but they certainly weren't playing the exact way that they should be playing. And so, with that in mind, it was a bit of a weird series. Like you got Mitchell Marsh, David Warner, Josh English, Marnus Labuschagne, Tim David, Sean Abbott, Michael Neser, Nathan Ellis in that side, right? I think that's the 5th game. Was it 5th or 4th? Yeah, 5th.
Bharat, if he was still here, he would be really happy that Michael Neser got a game, right? He's probably still really happy.
Who else is going to be happy about that squad, right? Like it is what it is. They were the players that they wanted to get some game time into, they kept there, and the players who were fit, which is also not a lot of people, they kept there. And everyone else is just like, we'll just toss you all around and we'll do what we can. So should South Africa be happy they started winning games? Sure. But would Australia be upset that they lost a few games there? Probably. I mean, if they are, I'd be shocked. Absolutely shocked. So there are individual stories that I think are quite interesting here, like the Heinrich Klaassen story, and and some of those other
Just
ones.
On that, I think South Africa's middle order. I mean, we spoke about how they're reliant on the top 6 plus Marco Janssen, who was also really good. We'll come to him later. But the way Heinrich Klaassen absolutely butchered the ball. David Miller got consistent runs at a quick strike rate, and Aiden Markram as well. He's been getting some scores, 100 and a 90. That trio of Markram, Klaassen, and what's his face? Who's the last guy? David Miller. Now, these 3 have played in India as well. At least Klaassen and Miller have quite a bit. Do you think that they could, hold the key with respect to South Africa's chances? Because look, Miller and Klaassen are 2 players who average over 40 and strike at over 100. We were looking at players with Cheyenne, incidentally, the other day, right? And there were only about 4 in contemporary cricket. So that's quite an asset to have because, and then when you paired with Markram, with those numbers, because teams would kill for like one of those guys. South Africa have 2.
Look, the whole top 6 is phenomenal. What they've done over the last 3 or 4 years since the last World Cup cycle. I don't think any team has had as consistently performing a top 6 and that ever in the history of ODI cricket as they've probably had over the last few years. David Miller has been completely I think because it took him so long to finally work out his game, people had kind of given up on him. And so when he got good, people weren't paying as much attention to it as perhaps they should have. Rassie van der Dussen, the amount of times that Rassie van der Dussen has, batted with Miller, and they'll be 4 wickets down in the 35th over, and they'll still score 150 runs in the last 15 overs without losing another wicket. It's just extraordinary what this team has managed to do over a period of time. And if there's still question marks, because Marco Jansen, I know in one of those games, I think he hit 32 off not many balls.
He got a few quick scores towards the end, right? A 30, a 40, then got a 5-wicket haul. He's been the supreme number 7 for South Africa off late. I know CS will be really excited with him.
And I think that matters a little bit more. So I think you're right. I think he got a couple of scores. I think he got 30 and a 40 odd.
Yeah.
That is really important, because I do think that allows them to stretch their legs a little bit more, right? To do that. But realistically, I don't think Marco Jansen is probably the difference between them winning and losing this World Cup, because if their top 6 continues to bat the way they are, that is what will make them whatever we have them as, second or third tier team, into the tier higher. My question is that I've seen them play live. I've commentated on them. I've done analysis, all these sorts of things, and I still don't know exactly how it's working. Now, that could just be that I'm missing something in the way that they're doing it. But when I do see something like that, I do wonder if that is the sort of thing that will fail in the World Cup, right? So when they get to the end, if let's say they lose, I think there was one of these games, let me just find it, where they were 80 for 3 after 18 overs, right? And Australia's bowling attack was Nisa Abbott, Green, Alice, Zampa, Tim David. So one frontline bowler in that, right? And they were 80 for 3. They get to, let's say, 60 for 3 against Sri Lanka in a must-win game to make sure that they qualify. That's when I worry about this batting lineup. I don't worry about it in bilateral games, but I worry about the lack of depth and the fact that they've basically done all their work in their top 6 over and over and over again. And we know that when you face Shaheen Afridi, he's going to take 3 early wickets, and Siraj is going to take early wickets, and Hazelwood or Stark or Bolt or even Van Meekeren. All these guys are capable of taking 2 and 3 early wickets, putting you on your ass a little bit. It's a very big difference from coming back for 60 to 3. And I'm not saying they're always going to be 60 for 3, but they're going to be 60 for 3 a couple of times. There's a big difference between doing that in a bilateral game and doing that in the World Cup. And that really needs to be, you need to put neon lights on that, mate. Do you know what I mean? You really need to put neon lights on that, because so much of what they have done, I just don't think is replicable, right? And yet they have managed to replicate it. And if I was going to compare them to any other sides, forget the shirts they wear, would be previous South African sides, where I've looked at it and just been like, I don't know about this. And everyone else will call them chokers. And I usually write the article going, well, it wasn't choking. They went in with this kind of lineup, and under the pressure, it was very hard to pull this kind of lineup off, right? The 5 bowlers, 6 batters combo, and Marco slapping a couple is quite handy, but he wasn't slapping them against Mitchell Stark and Jasper Bumrah, right?
True.
Right.
That's very true.
So that's the only thing I would say I would put into all of this, is that if you are hyping them up a lot, you need to know that. What I would say is they still have the best bowling lineup of any center country going to Asia in this World Cup, and they have
and
5.
They don't even have Nokia right now, right? Nokia is injured, so if he's back, they look a lot more potent.
Well, I don't even know if he plays in the team as it's currently constructed. I mean, because you play the 2 spinners automatically. Marco Jansen has to play for the batting at number 7, and then Ngidi and Rabada might take the seam bowling.
True. So I suppose he probably replaces Ngidi then if he comes in.
Well, Ngidi's record in one-day cricket of recent times in the power play is so exceptional, and he's a good death bowler. They may not.
And Nokia can't bowl in the power play, right? He's a middle overs destroyer.
He's not done very well in the power play of recent. He's averaging over 100. So it's not ideal. Look, I love Nokia, and I think that he maybe is a better bowler than Ngidi, all things considered. But right at the moment, I'm not sure. I suppose the point is they don't need to rush him back in, right? They can let him go. If maybe things are going wrong, they can bring him in, and they can have a look at that. Maybe against certain against certain teams. Maybe you bring Nokia back, for the Netherlands, right? And you say, just steamroll the Netherlands, steamroll Sri Lanka for us, which will make it easier on everyone else, and we can do that. But yeah, they're a really interesting team. As I said, value for money bet might be the best team. I think so many things have to go right for them to win, but the 6 batters, 5 bowlers, if you just look at their team in that way, it's a very good team. It's when you remember that that's not how, Aiden Markram might have to bowl because one of their bowlers gets hit around and all those sorts of things. That's when you start to think, well, is it as good as I thought?
Yeah, that's very fair. And given that team composition, I feel like I'm impressed with their bowling attack. I mentioned how I really like that middle order. So it really comes down to Quinny, Temba, if he's fit, because he's also gotten injured after scoring a few runs, and Rasi. If those three can get runs consistently up top, I think South Africa will have a better shot at winning games. But speaking of injuries, of course, we do hope that Temba Bavuma is back for South Africa. But what we do know is that Travis Head is going to miss the initial part of the World Cup for Australia. And this is a big blow, pun intended, definitely pun intended. But, given that Warner's going so well, it's his last World Cup, probably, considering the way things are going. And him and Head looked like a very formidable force up top. You could see that this was going to be one of the big positives for Australia in the World Cup. All of a sudden, that is hampered. How much will it potentially impact them?
Yeah, it's a dynamic opening partnership, and it's not an easy thing to replicate. I think they have enough batting talent to handle it, but do they have someone who is confident enough to be able to bat consistently in that position? And also, in order to fix it, do they have to move the rest of the order, right? They were just getting to a point where perhaps people were feeling better. Essentially, what Australia usually do is just throw talent at problems, right? Pakistan throw youth, and Australia throw talent at problems. So from that perspective, Marnus was the top run scorer, I think, in that South Africa series, right? Despite the fact he wasn't in all of the first game. Again, that's just talent, isn't it? So then you're backing him. Whether Marnus and Smith together can sometimes be a little bit too, let's call it Bubba Rizwan. I don't know. I don't know if that is an issue, but generally that's what they would do. They will throw talent at it. So I'm not 100% sure how they would go. Also, I don't know how much we know about the Travis Head injury yet.
It's a broken wrist, isn't it?
I mean, is it a hairline fracture? Is it a proper break? I don't know if it's because, the important thing to know is that players play with broken bones quite a lot, especially batters in their hands and wicket keepers. Is he a player who can play with it? Is it something where it needs to be right? And if it's something that needs to be right, if it is a proper break, then he's out for the whole World Cup, and the ball game's over. But I don't know.
Mitch Marsh is opening then for you? Is that the solution?
Well, that's what I meant. I mean, Marnus might be the one who just comes in and opens the batting in that situation, right? As I said, talent, just put someone up and go there. Cameron Green is someone that they might want to have a look at as well. That Smith could open. Like Marsh could open. That's what I mean. There's a lot of different options. It's how much Stoinis could open, perhaps.
Yeah, Stoinis could actually, right?
So how they look how they look at it probably depends on, it really depends on what they want to disrupt from the rest of that lineup. Would be my guess. But yeah, it's a fascinating one. If it does end up being something quite serious.
Yeah. Anyway, final thought on Australia, and I couldn't not talk about this. Adam Zampa equaled Mick Lewis, and both of those runs, the runs they conceded, 113 in 10 overs for no wicket, came against South Africa. One in the famous 400 game, and now in this 416 game that South Africa, the fourth ODI, I believe, the Klassen game. Funny, right? Zampa gets that record because he's been quite amazing for Australia in ODI cricket.
Do you know?
He's not Mick Lewis.
Mick Lewis is a legend. I used to captain my club. I think with Adam Zampa, the funny thing is that he was just getting to the point where everyone was starting to go, Adam Zampa's massively underrated. We should talk more about Adam Zampa. Yeah. We got Ari in our chat was talking about him nonstop, and other people have been saying how good he is. Someone sent me a message the other day. You got to do a video on how great Zampa's been, and they're right, all those people. And then this happens, and I think this is for someone who's always been a fan of Zampa. It always feels that as good as he's bowling, there's always a game around the corner where it all just falls apart. And I don't know if that's a mechanical thing or, maybe he didn't take the game as seriously, or it's just he got caught against the left-hander who could pick his wrong one, or whatever that may be. I think that his record is much better than Adil Rashid's. I think the one thing that Adil Rashid is very good at when he plays against a left-hander who is just going to hoik him to the leg side is Rashid basically turns himself into like an off spinner. He bowls really, really wide, these big, slow-turning wrong ones, and he says, well, if you want to swipe these across the line, you can. I reckon eventually you hit one straight up in the air. Zampa doesn't really have the ability to spin the ball as much as Rashid. He probably can't bowl the wrong one at the same level. It doesn't get as much drop or anything like that.
Makes better coffee than Adil Rashid.
Have I ever told you the story about like Adam Zampa walking around the hotel in the CPL, basically dressed in a toga with his coffee mug from back home? Anyway, for another
I
day.
believe it. I definitely believe the story. I can picture it.
So essentially, I don't know if it was a toga. I actually don't know the official name for the clothing he was wearing, but it was not traditional Australian cricket clothes. I could tell you that it wasn't his CPL clothes. So
did
yes,
he have a mullet, or did he not have a mullet?
I can't remember if he had a mullet back then. He's a lovely guy. I've met him a couple of times. Really nice guy. But yeah, so I think there are situations where matchups can get him, and Adil Rashid is maybe slightly better suited than that. But Zampa is better when everything's in both their favors, I think, and should be more suited to Indian wickets as well. Bowls a little bit quicker. But yeah, when it goes wrong for Zampa, I mean, this is an extreme example of it, but I kind of feel it really goes wrong for him. And it'd be a really interesting World Cup for Adam Zampa.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that Marcus Stoinis went and gave him a big giant hug after he conceded all those runs. But we'll come back after a short break to talk England and New Zealand. You're watching the Uncovered podcast with Behram and Jared, and we'll be back shortly.
This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Join our new YouTube channel, Jared Kimber Podcast. Engage with live recordings or listen to the thought-provoking chats 4 times a week, exploring shows like Wagon Wheel, Uncovered, Footmarks, and Red Inker. They cover everything from fan questions, weekend stories, articles, videos, what's going on in cricket, and just anything we want to talk about when it comes to the bat and ball game. Want to have live chats with me or just connect with other cricket fans on Discord that also enjoy my content? Or a few AMAs. Maybe you want early podcast episodes or ad-free content or want to receive my emailer. You can get all of this on our Patreon, plus a little bit of behind the scenes stuff as well. Huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon so far. You are all part of this channel's success.
Welcome back to episode 50 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter, and I'm with Jared Kimber as always. So, Jared, before we jump into the England-New Zealand stuff, there's a super chat by Eknath JP. So if you could bring that up to the screen and I can narrate it for you.
Please.
All right. Eknath asks, how do you remember Mohammad Asif's bowling from a skills-based point of view, and what do you make of the narrative around how good he was? I think he was poetry in motion, and out of all the spot-fixing scandals that have hit Pakistan, that was the one that probably hit Pakistan the worst. And I'd say this, knowing Mohammad Amir was also part of that. I think Asif was just different gravy. He could make the ball talk, bowl the wobble ball before anyone else could. And yeah, I'll let Jared take it away.
I've said for a long time, I think he's the most skillful seam bowler I've ever seen. I thought Stuart Clark, Vernon Philander, Jimmy Anderson, all have very, very good claims of being up there. But I think Mohammad Asif at his absolute best was so in control of what he did as a seamer that he was almost a spinner. He could move you around the crease exactly like a spinner does. His ability to move the ball in both different directions. Also, the wobble ball, as you said, which has changed the game, right? If Mohammad Asif doesn't do that, maybe it would have been worked out eventually in the next 5 to 7 years after that. But just because cameras got good, and so we started seeing close-ups of hands, and maybe bowlers would have worked it out that way. But Mohammad Asif was, absolutely brilliant at it. I think if you think of how brilliant Stuart Clark was over a very small period of time, Mohammad Asif did it on pitches that didn't help, and he didn't have the natural, the bounce that Stuart Clark had there. I don't think I've seen a seamer with the ability to bowl that many different deliveries at will, and be in complete control in each and every one of them and use them at the right time. I've tried to sit down with him before. As you could probably imagine, he's a bit of a interesting character.
Was he sober? Was he sober when you met him?
I was on WhatsApp. I was trying to get him to talk about the wobble ball, and he said, He said, yes, I can tell you so many things. Come to America. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get I don't know if I'm going to get anyone to pay me to come to America to talk to you about the wobble ball. But yeah, so look, I think it was just before the bit where we had super slow-mo cameras and all this, sort of others, and even the Hawkeye era was just at the start there. I think if we had all that stuff for him, he would be remembered even more fondly, although obviously, he shit in his own beer, to use a famous expression.
And he drank that beer then after shitting in it.
Well, I don't know if he drank the beer. I wasn't there for the full thing, but he certainly, paid for his crimes and is now, I think, living in America somewhere still, I think, last time I heard.
He's quite involved in the American cricket circuit. And I mean, the guy was absolute magic. And Eknath, if you want a more thorough explanation, just reach out to KP. Ask him the same question, right?
Google, I mean, if you haven't seen it, go to YouTube and find some of the spells he bowled to KP. Incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even Amla and AB speak highly of him. But anyway, we're going to move to England, New Zealand, because we're a little short on time. Last time we spoke about the series, it stood at 1-1. Of course, it was a 4-match ODI series, and England did win the last 2 games. They won the series 3-1. And perhaps the biggest takeaway is that Dawid Malan was opening the batting, replaced Harry Brook, scored a shit ton of runs, 127 in the last game, 96 in the third game. And he basically won himself a ticket to India. And Luke Wright has said that he will be opening the batting in India. So effectively, Jason Roy is out of the squad and Harry Brook is back in. And there is a lot of stuff to unpack over here. So please unpack it for me.
So I was pretty positive that Malan was going to play in the team regardless. And it's really interesting because Matt Roller was positive he was going to be the backup. And, we both have different people that we talk to and both have different ways that, that we look at all these different things, right? And in the end, it's not that either of us are probably right or wrong because we will never know 100% what had happened. But England gave Roy a big chance to prove himself. But essentially, I don't think it was that because Roy actually did get better after, struggling for a long time. But in the end, I think they just looked at Malan.
2 ODI tons this year, right? Jason
versus one against South Africa. Was it? Yeah, and then Bangladesh. So I think I commentated both of those games. So it wasn't that Roy proved himself to not be good. It's that Malan essentially just changed the conversation, right? If Roy had been fit and ended up averaging 35 in this series, I don't think Malan would be going as an opener. And I don't think that England's plan was to take him as an opener. I think they thought with Malan, they had someone who could back up any of their players from 1 to 5. But that I still believe that their decision was going to be to bat him at 4 and bat Stokes at 5, or the other way around. And that's now, and 2 things have changed because it isn't just Malan that changed. The other thing that changed was go back and have a look at some of the comments when I made my video about about Brook and Livingston. Everyone was like, I can't believe Livingston's in this side. And I was like, what have you guys been watching? Right. So Livingston basically proved that he can play in the top 6, which then meant that Malan proved he could play in the opening position. And so England made a very rogue decision. Now, were they looking for an excuse to bring Brook in? Yes. I don't think they wanted to go to the World Cup, struggle, and not have Brook in with everyone whinging at a certain point. And we talked about from the first time he was in the side. The problem isn't really the batting, because you could argue that Roy and Brook should be in this side. The problem, or in the squad, I should say, the problem is that they still don't know who their best bowlers are. And so because of that, they've made a similar decision again of just going, okay, well, we're just going to try to do this as best we can with an extra bowler on the side. And now we think that Brook is going to be able to do this. But, if they do get a late injury, I don't think Brook is going to be able to cover them in the same way, but maybe they'll just move things around. Maybe Stokes will open in that game or whatever the case may be. But I thought Malan was brilliant in the games I saw. He completely outbatted Brook. And I thought Livingston was brilliant. Did he make 2 50s, I think? I know he made the 90.
First 2 games.
Yeah, first 2 games. I thought he was brilliant in those games. And also in the...
Took some wickets as well, Livingston.
Yeah, he bowled shit. But he... I'm not giving him any credit for that. But I think it was that innings in the second game where I think he wanted to show, look, he knows he's never going to bat top 4, but I think he wanted to show he could at the very least be a backup number 5 for them. And obviously as a number 6, I think it was in that game he came in at 7. I actually moved Mo ahead of him. Might have been a matching as much as anything. And then Livingston came in and just crushed him everywhere. I was actually just watching some replays highlight to that before. Really, really strong innings. So I would say that it's a combination of Milan making runs and Livingston making runs that has meant that they just think they don't need Roy anymore. And what a sad end for someone who helped them win a World Cup. It was a fantastic player. I remember seeing Jason Roy as a really young talent, just absolutely next level. And he'll go off and play franchise cricket for the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be the direction. And I mean, I love Jason Roy, but I think this does make more sense because, Ben Stokes, he was clutching at his knee again when he scored that wonderful 182 at the Oval. He absolutely smashed New Zealand and he was just teeing off. It was Stokes at his breathtaking best, but you could tell that he was in a bit of pain. And if, for instance, Stokes does get injured in India, then the obvious replacement is Harry Brook, not Jason Roy. So to me, that kind of makes sense. But were you there for the Stokes innings? Talk to me about the Stokes innings.
No, I missed that one, sadly. So I didn't get to see that. Look, the one thing I would say about Stokes is we don't know exactly what his injury is. They're being very coy with it. If it is a lack of cartilage, and I'm not saying it's just a lack of cartilage, but if a lack of cartilage is part of the problem, so the Andre Russell injury, he's going to be clutching at it for the rest of his life, right? That doesn't necessarily mean he can't play cricket. Andre Russell's still playing, right? What it means is that occasionally the bones will bang together and it will hurt. So I'd be more worried about a lack of flexibility or the inability to, run for more than 30 meters than I would be in an individual clutch. Now, that's if I'm right and it is a lack of cartilage. If it's something else completely, like he's got I can't imagine what else would be this degenerative that he could still play with, though. So I'm going to assume it's that. But if it is something else completely, it might be a little bit different. But I think we have to. It's a bit like Mike Atherton or Michael Clark in their late career and seeing them clutch their back or stretch their back and go, ooh. But it's like, yeah, but they can play with it. It's just they're trying to make it looser at all times.
Yeah, fair enough. Just one final thought on England before I have like a quick 2-pointer on New Zealand as well. Just quickly now, name your 5-person bowling attack for England, and then I'll go.
Jofra
this is rapid fire. You don't get to
Mark
think much.
Wood. Jofra Archer, Mark Wood.
You can't bring Jofra in the equation over there.
It will be Wokes, Rashid, Moeen Ali, and then I would have Sam Curran. And I think as it currently stands, I would have Reece Topley. I don't think I would play Willie or the young fella whose name I've forgot. Atkinson?
Yeah, Gus Atkinson. I think Topley plays because he adds the left armour dimension. Of course, both Moeen and the Rashid play. And I would say Chris Wokes, is one of the first names on the team sheet. And I know a lot of people will disagree. They'll say it's Indian conditions or whatever. But he really makes that new ball talk. I think it's going to come down between Curran and Mark Wood for whatever games Mark Wood is available. That's how I see this,
Yeah, I kind of thought the only reason I don't have Mark Wood in that side is just because I think they still want a little bit of extra batting. And I think they want Topley at the top in the end. But I think it is possible that Curran, Wood, and Topley, all three of them, are actually slightly interchangeable and maybe different sides and different times. So by the end of the tournament, I'd actually be shocked if Mark Wood wasn't there, just because I'm not sure that Curran and Topley can do that job together. Yeah. If you're asking me who they would go with at the moment, I would think that Topley bowled so well in the middle overs in one of those games that they might even think that they can use him a little bit there. But it just, I don't think England are as confident as it were 4 years ago. I think the fact that they've suddenly dropped Roy really makes me doubt a lot of their confidence. And that's almost why I think that they may not go with Wood straight away. The other option, of course, is to go with Wood and Topley together and just back that you have enough batting talent to be able to get you through. And then, because Wokes still bats at 8 in that side, does he, or 7?
Yeah, because Moeen will be at
Moeen's
7.
at 7.
Wokes at 8. Yeah.
Wokes at 8. Then you have to back Moeen to bowl his overs, of course.
I mean, there's Livingston to kind of help over there if Moeen has.
Yeah, well, Livingston and Root give them a backup, I think. And then.
Well, if Root plays, right? Root's position is under contention right now. He's not scoring.
No, Root's going to play. That's not under contention. And then if you bring Mark Wood in, you give yourself the chance of slapping the ball around a little bit. Shardul Thakur, chaos hitting type guy at the end. So yeah, look, I mean, they could go with that. I'd be surprised if they rush Wood back in. and that they might just give it a couple of games and then see how the more all-roundery side goes. But Root, now you've got me saying Root all the time. But Wood is certainly the change they would make almost instantly.
Yeah. Well, fair enough. Some points on New Zealand, of course. We spoke about Rachin Ravindra in the last podcast, and we spoke about how he might be that weak link in New Zealand side. Well, he got 61 at Lords and took 4 wickets. Has he changed your opinion at all, or are we still there?
No, because I threw him about 8 half-crackers in the first game. Like, I mean, it's not that I don't think he's talented, because I do think he's very talented. I like his batting. I'm not sure his batting is going to transform them from a good side to a great side, but his batting might get out of trouble a few times, which is really good. He is capable of bowling good balls and getting wickets. I'm more interested in how he bowls in Asia anyway. But he was unbowlable in that second game, right? Massively on top, and he was unbowlable. And so that's an issue for them. And this isn't slandering him or anything as well, because he wouldn't be in that side. Bracewell would be in that side if they, they had their way about them. So, you've got a young player still learning his craft with a lot of talent, who's probably going to have a much bigger role in this particular World Cup than he should have. But there's talent there, and maybe he gets them out of a couple of games. I actually thought Glenn Phillips bowled better than him in this series, if we're being honest.
I think Glenn Phillips will be the standout player for New Zealand in this World Cup. I've got a feeling.
I feel like that all the time, and it never happens. So always hope for Glenn Phillips.
Yeah. One final thought on New Zealand, of course. Tim Southee is also injured himself. So there are injuries all over the world right now. And, Southee wasn't starting for New Zealand in the last World Cup because they had Trent Boult, Matt Henry, and Lockie Ferguson. And whilst Lockie is not at his devastating best right now, Henry's been really good. And Boult was the leading wicket taker in the series. He took a 5-fer as well, and then a 3 for another.
Only average of 11, wasn't it?
Yeah. And he's been out of the New Zealand team for a while. So now he's back. He's looking really good. And you'd have to think that maybe they won't really miss Southee as much.
Look, the problem with Southee is that he's a third new ball bowler, right? And they don't need a third new ball bowler. And I think Cheyenne looked the numbers up the other day. He's not a bad death bowler overall, but once it gets to the actual end of the death, he just gets absolutely hammered everywhere. And people, I'd love to say that cricket relies on stats, but kind of people don't. And they're eventually just going to go back to the whole thing of what they remembered. And I think that if you've watched New Zealand play, one-day cricket over a period of time, you would just remember a lot of overs where Southee got absolutely smashed everywhere.
Absolutely.
But if Lockie can't do what Lockie does, then, and Southee's fit, that kind of has to be Southee, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know what... I'm not saying they don't have other seamers, because clearly they do have other seamers, but
they don't have express pace.
No, but if Lockie's express pace goes for runs... I mean, Norkia and Lockie have not been at their best in the last year and a half. And I don't know if they've just got niggles or they haven't been able to, be completely fit. Lockie Ferguson at his best is the best bowler in this attack, right? I truly believe, especially in Asian conditions, especially in white ball conditions.
Yeah.
He's not at his best. And so maybe Southee back in if he's fit, just for that experience point of view. I don't think if Lockie isn't at his best, they can even make the semi-finals. I think if Lockie's at his absolute best, that gives him a good chance of making the finals. But he has to be at his absolute best. There's too many weaknesses in this side. They don't have a spinner who can take regular wickets. They've got a 23-year-old batter who we're talking up because he took 4 wickets, and we're hoping that works well. We're talking about Glenn Phillips bowling. Lockie Ferguson has to have a good tournament outside of Trent Boult taking 25 wickets.
Yeah, now that sounds fair enough. But anyway, that's a good place to end this podcast. I think lock that in, pun intended. But yeah, thanks to all the viewers for tuning in. And thanks to you, of course, Jared. And yeah, you can catch us again next week. I'm Behram Kazi. You can find me at DefMango on Twitter. And with me was Jared Kimber. We'll see you again for episode 51 next week. That's all for now. Goodbye.
This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager.